Okay, so welcome. I'm Metylda Ravenslake, and I'm here to talk about sheep breeds because that's kind of what I do. So this, um, so everyone's got handouts that wants them. This is more people than I was expecting. Yay! So RU period, we're going to look at British sheep and their history and would it be appropriate for different personas and kind of where they are in the region. So first up, we have the map. So I've kind of put on the map where they were located originally. So this is where they would have been originally found. They're for the most part still there right now. We have everything from the upper part, Shetland to Soye, all the way down to Portland on the bottom. I don't have anything in Ireland, and neither does this map, so we're good with that. Sorry, but I've tried to kind of cover the different regions of England. Scotland will get a lot from the upper sheep and also from the borders. So how hard can it be, or why should we have a class on sheep? So sheep provided so much of the day-to-day life. On a daily basis, it did this really weird thing called producing manure, which helped enrich the farmland. It also helped cut down the grasses. On a yearly basis, it provided milk, which gave them cheese to help them survive the winter. It also gave them lambs, which gave them more sheep. So it produced wool, which helped keep them warm. And then once a lifetime, they died. So the farmer or the sheep herder got the carcass, everything from the outer to the inner that was used. So the bones, the horns, the guts, all of this was used by the farmers and by a lot of the people that we portray. One of the other things newcomers are often told is wool is period. Wool is period, but not all sheep breeds that are available to us nowadays would have existed back before 1700. Most of the people nowadays can get easy access to things like merino, very common wool. Most everyone's heard of it. Merino comes from Spain. It is period, but right now there are so many varieties of merino. It's grown on everywhere from Australia to Ireland and everywhere in between. But there's also more than that, and Icelandic. Those seem to be the two big ones Scadians really seem to know. England has a rich history of sheep and sheep herding, and it is kind of entwined in every fabric of society. So how hard can this be to research? There is a lovely quote by Walling in the book Counting Sheep, who goes, "There is something wistful about the modern interest in rare breeds of livestock. None of the commercial breeders in the past cared a jot about retaining a breed that had outlived its usefulness. Nor do they care much now. That's largely why there are hardly any accurate records of what the early types looked like or how they were transformed into modern breeds. If it stopped being useful, they stopped using it." Also, there weren't really things such as sheep breed back then. It was, oh, that local variety over yonder. Oh, those people down there, they have slightly better sheep for this. They didn't really go, oh, your sheep must fit this standard to be called a Hinsdale sheep. Not really something they had. What the farmers and shepherds had back then, they did look at genetics, but not in the way we think of it. They looked at sheep and they selectively bred for things like how survivable, local adaptation, and ease of management. So were they good mothers? Did they get foot rot in the wet area that they had? And could they survive on their own? Could they survive a harsh winter? We hit the like the 1750s, and sheep start going haywire, for me anyway. You had the Industrial Revolution, and what happened was the price of sheep wool dropped because cotton became more readily available. People left the country and moved to the city. So a lot of sheep farmers now needed a way to make money. And we have a gentleman called Bakewell who came in and started messing with sheep. And he came up with this breed that was fast to mature. It had a really large carcass. And everyone went, that's an awesome idea. I'm going to do that too. And so people started trying to improve their breed to be more meat sheep, because if you could get it faster to mature, you could sell it quicker. If you had a larger carcass, you could get more money for the meat. The taste apparently was not as great as it had been, but you have masses to feed and they really don't care. We do get a few improvements on the wool, but very rarely. Most of the time, the wool quality suffered, but they didn't care because they weren't selling the wool at that high of a price at that time. We know some of the breeds today were from this have improved, and I'll cover some of them, but we also know what they were like in period, and we know what improvements were done to them. One of the other problems with the improved breeds is they actually became more work. People weren't careful in their crosses, so sometimes they'd cross a really large ram with a really small ewe. And the progeny would get stuck in the canal, so they'd have problems with birthing. They started to lose their smarts, but they got more meat. So they also became more prone to things like internal parasites and foot rot. So you had shepherds who had more meat, but they had more problems now. One of the other things with this is SCA hobby, when you want to research something from a specific place, getting materials from there is not the easiest. There are wool breeds or these breeds of sheep elsewhere, but we're also starting to notice like this breed in New Zealand is larger than the breed in England. The breed in America has better wool, but a smaller carcass. So we're starting to see where the sheep eats and lives is impacting the carcass and the wool. So I'm trying to get stuff directly from England, and prices being what they are, they've been going up since Brexit. It's not been the easiest. So why these breeds? I can make an argument for them being present, if in name alone, but I can say, no, we know there was a breed like this in this area. Or I can say, there was a breed, we know what improvements or changes were done. So this is the modern breed. This is what it is now. Imagine how it was then. So even those that escaped improvement, the great improvement of the sheep, we know that changes were made just because climate changes. We also know that some of them have gone near extinction. So nearby sheep relatives, which sounds weird to say, but nearby relatives were brought in to help increase the population and bring in a little bit more genetic diversity. And one of the other big reasons for these is I wanted to have samples on hand, because fiber arts, it's tactile. You want to touch things, you want to see, and there are so much differences in the feel of wool from one breed to the next that most people don't realize. So that's one of the main reasons for these. So as with any hobby, there's terminology that creeps into my language that you might not know. You'll hear me talk about guard hair, which is like on dogs. If you've got a German Shepherd, it's got that wiry outer coat and the soft undercoat. The wiry outer coat is guard hairs. Sheep have them too, or they can. There's also a term called kemp that might come up, especially with Herdwick. It is really just called it's a wonky hair. Trying to find a better definition, it's all like, it's a wonky hair. It's not part of the wool, but it's a wonky hair. You'll note it when you see it, and that's the best way I can tell you about it. I think one of the other things I have is, you'll hear me say something like, oh, it's a down breed. Oh, it's a fine wool. These are all categorizations, kind of like if you've got the American Kennel Club, they've got the hunting group, and they've got the other groups who are escaping me, like the retrievers and such. Sheep are divided similarly. It's less formal definitions, though. There are some books that will list one sheep as a down breed and it listed as a mountain breed in another one. So know that they can be kind of fluid. So on to the next things. This is kind of just a sample slide of what I have. And the main thing I want to point out is it's kind of a fun slide for me, but also you'll notice I have things like from FFSB, that's the Fleece and Fiber Source Book. It's a book that came out in about 2010, 2011. It covers about 200 different types of woolly animals, mostly sheep, but it does cover like yak and bison and cats and dogs. I like to use like their fleeces. Fleece weight gives you an idea of once it's shorn, this is how much wool you got. That's not going to be what you end up with because once you wash it, it'll lose some of the lanolin, so the weight will be less. And then once you process it, it'll be even lighter yet. But it's kind of a good idea of if this lamb or if this sheep is going to start off with just giving you 2 pounds, that's not a whole lot to begin with, as opposed to another sheep that's going to give you 20. So it just kind of gives you a good idea of how much it would have gotten from a sheep. Fiber length will also just help you with spinning or concept of how long or short the hair is, or the wool is. And then I have the fiber diameter. That just helps you determine how fine it is. There are Bradford counts on there, and the Bradford count is, if I can remember this, from a pound of top, which is a preparation where all the fibers are aligned, how many single strand 560-yard hanks could they get from that pound by a competent spinner? So when you see, like, I have up there, for example, 36 to 58, it's a really wide range, but you'll see like 40 to 44. So they can get 40 to 44 hanks of a single ply yarn out of that. Going to be on the finer side. I like nowadays we have the micron count because the Bradford counts or the Bradford system, very subjective. And nowadays we can get an exact number. So with the Bradford count, the higher numbers, the finer. Micron count, the lower numbers, the finer. So Bradford counts will always look like 36S-56S, something along those lines. Next up, I would have another sample and personal observations. For example, I didn't know that Sean the Sheep was a Suffolk. I did know that he first appeared in A Close Shave. So, and if you do want sheep shenanigans, I have provided that link. It does so promise them. So on to the sheep breeds, unless we've got any questions, because I speak really quickly when I'm nervous and I'm petrified right now. Thank you.
Yay, sheep.
So any questions, anything? All right, we will go on to the sheep. So Soye is the first breed up. It is off the west coast of Scotland. This is actually a Bronze Age sheep that we have that is still alive. It is a different skeletal structure. It is a finer boned one. It is much closer to the wild ancestors than anything else we have, without going to the Middle East. So it is a very small fleece. You can see Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook says up to 2 pounds. Other sources say up to 5. But it's a very small fleece. And hey, let me pass that sample around. It's part of the reason for this. It is a wild breed of sheep. It is not domesticated. It is found on Soye Island. So that's knit, spun, and then here's some of the fiber if you just want to play with it. It is lightly washed, so it does have lanolin in it. Not a whole lot, but enough to just get the dirt out and some of the lanolin off of it. It's located on Soye Island. The Vikings rode by and went, look, there's sheep on that island. We're going to call it Soye Island, which means sheep island. So this sheep is literally called sheep. It is pronounced soye or soy. I heard it as soye, so that's kind of what I stuck with. It's also found on St. Kilda and the Outer Hebrides, which is nice because it's now got more than one population. So they are trying to do that to just protect the breed in case an outbreak of hoof and mouth reaches the island. One of the things about this breed, we know it's primitive because it actually sheds its own wool, something called rooing, R-O-O. Nowadays, they do go in and shear, but it would have actually just rubbed off on plants. It would have rubbed it off on the ground, kind of like you see the bison in the national parks, and it's kind of got that partially shed fur wool. That's what these would have done. But like I said, nowadays they go to the island, they gather them up, which is apparently fun. And they give them a health check and make sure they're okay. And at that time they shear it. One of the other things we know, most people think when sheep get scared, they flock together. These ones actually scatter. So they have no known predator on their island, so they're doing okay. But this is kind of as primitive as we can get. It goes back to the Bronze Age. So if you are doing any sort of really early period, this probably would have been a good choice for you. We know they're now on soy, that we don't know how far they would have been into the mainland. We also don't know if there were other breeds that would have been more of a hair sheep and less of a wool sheep. But this was here before the Romans. It came with some of the first men that came to the, yes. Yes, because there's so many just little islands, they are keeping them on their own because they would actually hybridize with them and create a new breed. But they have plenty of abandoned islands that are uninhabitable, that they have moved them to their own other islands because having all your sheep on one island is apparently a bad thing. I love a Hebridean fleece because it is also a primitive breed and it's an all natural black sheep. It is gorgeous. It's a cousin to the Manx, which I'll talk about in a bit too. So, yeah, but primitive breeds are fun just because they still have their wits about them, for better or for worse. So the Rare Breed Survival Trust, or RBST, as you'll see me have on the slides, is a British charity. It was started many years ago and was sponsored by then Prince Charles, now King Charles. They kind of rate the breeds, the native sheep of England. It used to be a 5-tier system. Now it's just priority and at risk. And then, oh, these are our native sheep. Soye is at risk just because it is isolated and they do have so few numbers. So next up we have a Shetland. Shetland is nice because it is readily available. It is also another primitive breed, but this one goes back to the Iron Ages. They think, they think it was a cross between a Viking sheep and Soye or Soye relative. I have a booth downstairs with it spun up, but I don't have it up here, of course. So this is Shetland. Shetland comes in a wide variety. Everything from the coats to the colors. Shetland can have 3 different types of coats: a dual coat where you've got the guard hair and the wool, a transitional coat, which is less guard hair, more wool, and a single coat, which is almost all wool and maybe some guard hair. You also have so many lovely colors. It comes in 11 natural colors and 30 different patterns of colors on their fleeces. Pardon me while I open my beverage. It is a similar structure, bone structure to Soye. And we also know it is from what they call a short tail breed. Oddly enough, because it has 13 bones in its tail as opposed to 20 as other sheep do. The short tail sheep are a more primitive breed as well. Also tends to come more from the Viking side of things. Let's see. It's also been called a cousin to the Icelandic. Pardon me. And it's so, I like it especially because it is so readily available. It is not expensive. You can get it pretty much anywhere. Yes.
I have seen American folks raising Shetland sheep. And you mentioned before that we've started to see a differentiation between British and American.
I haven't seen that yet in Shetland.
Okay.
But it probably might be another decade or two. So
I'm good going with the American Shetland.
Yes. There's also, because it's got different coats, the fiber diameter can greatly vary. If you get a single coat, you're probably getting something very fine. Most of the places will separate the dual coat, or at least get most of the guard hair out. It is a moderate felter. It's not a ready felter, which is one of the main reasons I don't like merino. Also, it's not my favorite to spin. Shetland is lovely to spin. It's lovely to work with. It's got such a wide variety of colors. And since it's an Iron Age sheep, it would have been also on the mainland. Any persona really could have had it. We know that with the Jacobean Rebellion and such, when they went through the clearings in the Highlands, they got rid of the crofters' sheep, which the descriptions of sound a lot like the Shetland sheep. They're small, they're tiny, and they really replaced them with a lot of Cheviots and official, more sheep. But Shetland are just fantastic, especially if you're doing knitting. You can have different colors. It's kind of like with the Fair Isle sweaters. You can get that with all natural colors. So also they are famous for the wedding ring shawls, where they would knit so fine they could pull it through their wedding ring. I'm lucky, I have really fat fingers, so that wouldn't have been a big problem. Also, it's a very warm wool, very light. Just a nice shawl will keep you warm. So one of my favorite sheep, actually Shetland is probably one of my favorite sheep, probably the one I would keep. Next up we have Ryland, which is where I first get its period in name. It's considered a down breed, but it doesn't always act like one. Historically, we know Rylands existed in period. Whether it was by Leominster or Ryland, we have heard both come up and both are used interchangeably. We have the quote up there by Troy Smith about how among the short wills, the Ryland was anciently supreme. It bore the finest of all British sheep, challenging merino wool quality. And really, there is talk about how Leominster Ore, which we think either was another name for Ryland or it was a precursor to. I'm more inclined to say another name for it, because you'll see other sheep have like 4 or 5 different names. Leominster Ore might have just been what one area called it as opposed to another area. But in the 16th century, we have a poet who is like, who hasn't heard of this wool? It's rivaling the silk spider for its thinness and fineness. There are also stories about Queen Elizabeth I, who was given a pair of stockings knit from either Ryland or Leominster Ore. I've seen the same story with both of them. And then the conclusion for both of them is, and then she preferred those stockings above all else, and she required that all of her stockings from there on out be made from this wool, which again is why I'm kind of going, I think it's just the same name. for the sheep, or it's different names for the same sheep. We also know there was a Florentine merchant by the name of Francesco Pelagotti. Apologies if I'm butchering the name. He actually would go around England and buy wool for Florentine mills and on behalf of banks. He paid 28 marks for a sack of 364 pounds of wool, Ryland wool specifically. And that was in about 1320s. The 28 marks would be about 5,300 today. 1 mark is about 8 ounces of silver. Around the same time, he paid 14 marks for wool from Lincolnshire or Leicestershire, which would be about 2,600 some odd. As a comparison, in 2012, 2013, a sack of Lincoln wool went for about $900, sorry, 600 pounds or so. So this was, when we talk about wool made people wealthy, this is sort of the things that we're talking about, is it made fortunes for people. In fact, Princess Diana, her family, the Spencer family, made their fortune with wool. During the Great Improvement, Ryland was crossed with Leicester, and it was only after many generations of the sheep they realized that the wool was just not what it used to be. And unfortunately, they had crossed all the sheep, so they really couldn't undo it. I don't know when, but I read that they were later crossed with Southdown to try to bring some of the finer texture back. It is still a very, very fine breed. Hey, I should probably pass that around, shouldn't I? So you can feel what I'm talking about. I have both a colored and a white fleece here. So, and then, but it doesn't rival merino nowadays, but it is a lot more felt resistant than merino is. So if you're going to make socks, I would make it out of Ryland instead of merino. Merino is great. It's great for next to skin, but it doesn't last because it is so fine. So one of my favorite quotes is, writer says of the Ryland sheep, "It is the ancient breed that was improved into insignificance," which kind of tells us what we're missing out on with this wool. They are cute, they are adorable. We also have Walling that said, "The wool of the modern Ryland is so much inferior to that of its forebears, having been ruined by injudicious crossing, that it is but a shadow of the sheep whose fleece once rivaled the best of Spain." If you ever hear referred to the Spanish sheep, they're talking about merino. Which is, I mean, unfortunate, because this wool is very fine. Imagine how much finer it once was. It's like, oh my God, what did we lose along the way? Yes, the bombing or the destroying of the Library of Alexandria still disturbs me at night. The ruination of Ryland does too. So again, if you want something that is very fine and warm, Ryland is great for it. Also, since it went all the way around the world from Flanders to Italy, it's great for people from like the Midlands, even France and Italy. It's also great, sorry, I should have also mentioned, since we also know it was in Elizabethan time, Elizabethans, it's a great, great fiber for you. Next up, we have Romney. I mentioned a bit ago about how sheep have different names. Romney is also known as Kent, Marsh, Romney Marsh, Romney or Kent, Romney or Kent Marsh, or what is it? Cathedral, I believe, is also another one. We have an idea that it was possibly brought here by the Romans. It just seems to have been around for several thousands of years. Ryder, who is a much known speaker on sheep history, talks about a 1697 charter that gave pasture for 300 sheep on the Romney Marsh to the monastery of Lyminge, and the reclamation of the salt marsh for sheep is believed to date back to the Roman times. One of the things about living on a marsh is your feet are almost always wet. Romney have developed a resistance to foot rot and other ailments that befall sheep living in damp ground. They're very hardy, very adaptable. And pretty much everything says that there's been sheep on the Kent and Romney Marsh since the first settlers came, whether it came with the Romans or they were here. Evidence seems to point to the Romans bringing it with them. It's not like Portland or Cheviot in structure and bone structure or just habitat. So given that the Romans came about first century or so, it's been around for a while. Given that it does have that strong resistance to foot rot, it has developed in that marshy area. It has developed how to survive. There was some improvement to the breed with the Bakewell Leicester, but it was so long ago that there wasn't as much harm done to it. And then the breed was pretty much left alone after that. One of the other benefits Romney gives us, it's been used to create a whole bunch of other breeds. Coopworth, California variegated mutant, long name for a breed that is out of California, a Perrindale and Romdale, and it does felt, which is funny given that it's on a marsh all the time. One of the things I like about the Romney sheep is post our period, but we know it was smuggled to France during the Napoleonic Wars. There were a lot of smuggling on the Romney Marsh, and they had a lot of wool that they couldn't sell because England said, hey, we're not going to play with that. We're not going to do anything with the wool right now. So the smugglers went, hey, you got wool? I got a way to go to France. Awesome, let's make a deal. It just, you never think of smuggling wool as an illicit activity. Just the wool, just the wool. A lot easier, less buying. So since it is found on the southeastern portion of England, if you're from that area or if your persona is, it even would have reached London, hop, skip, and a jump from the Romney Marsh area. But yes, it's Romney wool has been known for a long time. So Portland is next up, and I mentioned how Romney is not like Portland. Portland is a very rather unique breed, and I came across it because there was somebody who was looking for what sheep her persona would have had, and her persona came from the Isle of Portland or thereabouts. So I got into researching it, and the Isle of Portland is really on the southern coast, on the west side. It has a little isthmus. When the tides come in, Portland becomes a little isle. So we know from the Doomsday Book in 1086, there were 900 sheep on the Isle of Portland. That's compared to 3 calves, which I believe are small horses, 14 cattle, and 27 pigs. So this was a sheep place. It is believed they were descended from a Celtic type of sheep that were there before the Romans came. The Romans wrote that, oh, there's this white sheep with red legs and red faces. If you look at the wee little guy, you can see that. The nice thing with Portland, one of the main reasons it has survived, it will eat what other sheep won't. It will survive on thistle. It will survive on coarse grass. It will eat shrubs. It is one of the reasons that it has survived on the island is because nothing else would. Stubbornness. For eating?
For eating things.
Oh.
All of those things.
Ooh.
Right.
Mm.
That's true. No.
So what sheep does Your Highness have?
Jacob Border Leicester Cross.
Mm.
Oh.
So where do I steal your wool from? I mean, how do I acquire the...
You mean some bags and bags that I haven't possibly really got time to touch. You mean those?
Yes. How do I help you with that?
We can talk.
Yes.
Means you get more every year.
Mm.
Oh.
I get it, because if you have too much lying around, you're actually inviting rodents and critters, and yeah. Yes. So Portland is a great, very thrifty sheep. They're in the Isle of Portland in England. Alas.
Get them?
I think you have to do it like through semen, which is how they're trying to develop the Valley Black Nose here. No. My heart is breaking for you because, oh my God, I would love Hebridean sheep here. Anyway, so with the Portland sheep, it is a mountain breed, which is why it can survive up high on things. Their numbers did plummet, and they did have, the Rare Breed Survival Trust did bring in Exmoor Horn, which is a close cousin of the Portland, to help bring the numbers up, and just to help keep the breed alive a bit more. Another unique characteristic is they actually have a long breeding period, and they can go into season twice a year. So apparently a lot of farmers don't like that, because it's almost like you get done with one and then you've got to deal with it again. Instead of, hey, if I've got twins, I've got 2, I have a whole year, and then I can worry about it again. So it's almost like having a kid every 6 months. There's a lot less uniformity in this breed because they are, once again, just kind of left alone. But they can be left alone, which is, compared to some sheep, apparently the meat, which is what I was talking about when I thought you said meat, apparently the meat is very delicate in flavor. It's actually on, I believe, the World Heritage meat or food. And it was a favorite of, like, let's bring the really high-ranking officers over to have some Portland meat, because it was just a very delicate flavor. Again, it's a breed that was allowed to mature slowly. over the course of 2 years, as opposed to the fast food of meat. If you have any sort of persona that was in the southeast of England or southwest of England, off the coast area, this would probably be another good one for you. What to do? Okay, I have a lot of favorite breeds. If I could bring one breed over, Manx would be mine. I love Manx breed because it is related to the Hebridean. It is the heavy metal sheep. One of the things about Manx, the female, the ewes, and the rams both have horns. Ewes tend to have 2 to 4, and the males tend to have 4 to 6. There's even recently one recorded as 8 horns. But they are actually close cousins to the Hebrideans. They are another primitive breed. In the past 100 years, they've been near extinct 3 times. They are a primitive breed, so they have been on the Isle of Man since records were kept. Originally, they were found in white, black, gray, and brown, but the brown was so unique of a color, especially as a natural fiber, that in like 1650, there was a gentleman that did a history of the Isle of Man, and he spent a very, very long paragraph about the color brown of these sheep. He called it like, oh, the color of hair, the color of sand, and oh, it's such an exceptional brown. It was a point of pride that these sheep had this color wool, that a lot of clothing was made out of it, and it kind of marked the person as being from the Isle of Man. One of the spelling things I should note is the spelling of Lotan. Apparently there are as many spellings as there are horns on the sheep. It is not a standardized spelling. People tend to go by what is on the Rare Breed Survival Trust, but no, there can be no H, there can be no A, you can come across a wide variety of spellings on that. It's also known as the Manx mountain sheep in earlier times when there were more colors. It is, again, related to the Hebridean, Soye, Shetland, also Boré and North Ronaldsay, which I won't talk about, but are other primitive type breeds. Also, if you know anyone who refers to the seaweed sheep, they're talking about North Ronaldsay. They actually do eat seaweed and dead birds. Manx is another one that has survived because it is a very thrifty eater. They brought the improved breeds into the Isle of Man, and the Manx went up the mountain. And that's where they ate scrub, they ate whatever they could get. In the 1950s, a guy went to a market and went, "What's wrong with those sheep?" I used to wonder what was wrong with them because they were being sold for next to nothing. The answer was simple. As a primitive species, they took longer to reach maturity than modern hybrids. In other words, they do not conform to modern marketing standards. He bought all the sheep that were at the market, and then he went through all the different farms in the area and bought all the Manx that they had. And he has pretty much brought it back from about 50 to 75 sheep to over 700 today. The Rare Breed Survival Trust has gotten in on this. The Isle of Man didn't care about the sheep for a while. After this guy started bringing them back, they started taking pride in the sheep again. So much so that in the early 2000s, when the hoof and mouth disease was going around, they canceled one of their major events, which was an international motocross race, which people come all over for. They canceled it because they didn't want anyone bringing any disease in because the animals were still in a precarious position. Yeah, it's a lot like the Portland too, where it can survive on anything, and also much like the Hebridean for that, because again, I love you so much more. Sorry. So persona wise, it's a primitive breed. It would have been pretty common. And up until like the 18th century, you would have found people wearing like a houndstooth with the brown in it, or vests or jackets. Just, it was that much of a point of pride. If you've ever heard of the Castle Milk Morit sheep, the Castle Milk Morit looks a lot like the Manx. It's a cross between the Manx and the Shetland. Very brown, or at least the stuff I've had is brown. Morit is a brownish color, but it's a little looser of a fiber, more like the Shetland. It also tends to have scurf, which is annoying, but for my own personal use, I'm okay with it. Scurf is like dandelion that encases around the fibers, and it doesn't wash out, and it doesn't comb out, and it's annoying. I should also point out that Lowton comes from Manx for either burnt brown or mousy brown. It doesn't really have a direct translation. People like to say mousy brown just because it's nicer. Burnt brown just doesn't sound as nice. Oh, yes. Hey, I didn't pass this around, did I? I am so sorry. Horrible. It is very springy. And what I'm passing around is washed with spun and then a commercially prepared one. Commercially prepared stuff tends to take some of the natural characteristics out of the fibers, in my personal opinion. So you get to see how just the washed fiber, there's just springiness. It's a very technical term, but springy and bouncy. And then the processed fiber, it almost is like you took a flat iron to it. So, but yes, this is probably, if I could bring one breed over, it'd be the Manx, probably followed by the Hebridean. Just because they're the heavy metal sheep. I mean, really. So next up we have Lincoln. If you have a persona in the Midlands, East Midlands especially, this would be a good one for you. This in Leicester, though, derives from all the improvements Bakewell did